Hey, welcome everyone to the From the Shadows podcast. I am your host, Shane Grove. And before we get started with this week's episode, I just want to remind everybody that if you want to check out all things From the Shadows podcast, the easiest thing to do is go to our website. There you can get links to all of our social media, TikTok, X, Instagram, Facebook, anywhere you can go to our store. You can get an Ozark Howler t-shirt. You can go to our Patreon page, see some stuff that's going on over there. But most importantly, there's a contact button. And if you have an experience that you want to share with me and maybe come on and talk about on the show, that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. Just hit the contact button, send me an email. If you want to get a hold of me directly through other forms of social media, just find me at Shane Grove Author on Instagram or somewhere on Facebook and send me a message and I will respond at some point. I try to keep pretty close tabs on what's going on and be prompt. So, with that being said, I have a pretty cool guest coming up. He he's a Bigfoot researcher, but we're not going to get too far in the weeds on his Bigfoot stuff because he actually, if you guys are fans of the Sasquatch Chronicles, and I'm assuming that if you listen to me or listening to Wes, he shared some really great Bigfoot stuff on a recent episode of West. So I figured, why do the same thing? He's got plenty of other cool stories he's going to share with us. So, Hugh from the great state of Washington, thanks for joining us on the From the Shadows podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I will tell everybody, so like all of our longtime listeners, if they remember an episode from way back called Bigfoot and Marijuana. So that was our buddy Colin was on that episode. Great episode. Well, Colin and you go way back. Now I'm not saying you're involved.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you're involved in the Bigfoot and Marijuana episode, but Colin reached out to me and said, "Hey, you got to talk to my buddy. He's got some cool stories." So he hooked us up, and I want to hear some of these cool stories. So give a little bit of background about your Bigfoot stuff, and you have a research area and that. But then let's get into some paranormal stuff that's happened.
Kind of really a newbie in a way. It was about a year and a half ago that I had my first true sighting of a Sasquatch. Even though now looking back, I do suspect there was some other incidents prior that I have a different perspective on now. But yeah, in a short period of time, I went pretty crazy hard into Bigfoot research after seeing one, after just being blown away by definitively knowing that, wow, these things really do exist, because at that time period, I was kind of convinced I was too smart to believe in like that, and to just be dumbfoundedly blown away at just like how we are. I went hard into the Bigfoot research, and that actually kind of stems out of because of previous paranormal experiences I had that I could never really do anything with. I couldn't pursue it, couldn't research it, couldn't get anybody to give a damn about it, and when I found myself staring at it, realizing that Sasquatch exists in our mountains, in our forests. I know the woods, I know the backcountry. I mean, my life in the woods and that. So I just went hard after Sasquatch. But in my actual research area, my main research area, previous to Bigfoot, there was a bunch of weird experiences that happened in that area. And that area just has a really crazy history of all kinds of weird stuff. And so, I mean, yeah, my research is after Bigfoot, trying to prove the existence of Bigfoot by any means necessary. But so, yeah, it's even though Bigfoot, Sasquatch is my main focus, I'm always looking around for something else, some kind of other paranormal evidence. Bigfoot itself has so much paranormal stuff surrounding their existence. And so I'm always looking up at the sky at any kind of light, kind of weird UFO thing going by. and my trail cams have captured orb entities of white light moving through the trees in broad daylight. Even it was a sunny, beautiful day when this white blob of light was captured moving through the forest, which that in itself is bizarre because you shouldn't even be able to see light if the sun is shining, but yet there it was triggering the game camera. And
so is that caught on a photograph or a video of the?
It's three pictures, click, and you can see it on my YouTube channel. And while this blob of light is moving shots, there's what looks like a footprint on the ground that appears right underneath it. This weird indentation appears only in one of the pictures too. It's really bizarre, really weird piece of footage. And that trail cam actually captured a translucent like humanoid figure. You can only see the legs and sort of the back and the shoulder of it. And it's there for, I believe it's 3 pictures, and it's just kind of moving. And then it disappears completely. And there's this blob of like black mass that kind of swirls and moves a little. And for 3 or 4 more pictures. And that picture is really interesting because that same trail cam captured this weird anomaly of weird beams of light flying through the trees. And while those beams of light are moving through the trees, a deer runs through the shot. And so if I were to use that picture of that deer is a size measurement for the translucent being, it's really like perfect size for a decent 7-foot Sasquatch, give or take. This thing's way bigger than the deer. The deer would have been like, not even waist high. And it's all of that was captured on one trail cam, which it's funny because it's one of the cheapest, most dated trail cams I have. I bought off, used off Marketplace or something. And so, of course, ironically, the cheapest, oldest, crappiest one's the one that's capturing all this weird stuff. And it doesn't even do video. All it does is photos. And it was found underneath these arches, these super bizarre structure-like arches that I'm just fascinated by, and I'm finding them all over my research area. And it's under those arches is where I've recovered the 2 different pine cones, which I don't know if you listened to my interview or not. I don't remember how we really got into the pine cones, but I have them right here. These pine cones, in my opinion, should or could be, some of the biggest discoveries in Bigfoot, really, because if I had the money and the funding to really test these, there's teeth marks in them, which I believe they were carried in their mouth, big giant pine cones, because these pine cones came from hundreds of miles away. This particular tree doesn't grow in my area. It's a subalpine tree. And so, with the right test, you could figure out exactly what forest these came from. You could find DNA on them. You could prove that these creatures are intelligent, that they're either migratory or transitory. These pine cones could prove so much about Sasquatch. But, all they do is just sit in a freezer until, I just haven't been able to get anybody behind them, anybody excited about them, and it's frustrating. And also, they weren't originally discovered by me. They were discovered by a scientist that I took out on a research mission with me. He's a geologist, a friend of mine. He's like a friend of a friend type guy. He's the one that spotted the first pine cone and said, like, this is weird. This should not be here. This is not from this forest. I wouldn't have even picked it up. Just another pine cone. It's a weird pine cone, but without him, I probably would have never found it. And then my son actually found the second one. And it just, the potential of what those could prove, if I could get the right attention on them, it proves so much. But, for now, it is what it is. They're just collecting dust. And those pine cones are real, in a way, similar to a totally different experience that has frustrated me for years prior to getting into Bigfoot. in this exact area underneath the sky, the same skies that are over the top of my research area. My parents live out there, and I was staying at my parents' weekend, and I'm looking up at the sky, and initially I see this black massive cloud, but it's not like any other cloud I've ever seen. It was shaped like a tornado, sort of like this really wide, and then it got narrower and narrower. When I saw it, I was like, wow, the only thing I can think of is that would have been a daytime meteorite that burned up in the atmosphere and maybe punched through it and left this debris cloud. And so it's weird. So I kept staring at the sky, and then I saw another one, and I spot another one. And then I actually see one, and I get to see that it's forming. It has this tiny little speck at the tip of it. Just tiny, but when you see a commercial jet at cruising altitude, they're just a speck in the sky. And so I watched this thing form and disappear into the far horizon out towards the Pacific Ocean from where I was standing. So I get back to my parents' house, and I'm telling them about these things that I keep seeing, and that I actually got to see one form. And so this is probably the next, now that I about it, the next following day, the following evening. And I had seen quite a few of these by this point. I mean, I had seen maybe as many as 10 of these over about a 2-day period. Then it's evening time, and I'm in the hot tub with my kids, and I see one forming. And so I go in and I tell my dad, come out and look at this. And he comes out with his binoculars, and he's looking at it. And at this point, I was saying these must be meteorites. I've never heard of a daytime meteorite shower where you get to see them burning and creating smoke and soot in the sky. But as my dad's zooming in on it, he sees, and he's like, that's no meteorite, because it just took a hard left turn. And so I took the binoculars from him, and I'm looking at it, and sure enough, it was headed towards the Pacific Ocean. And then it hooked a hard left and was going off the other direction. So, meteorites don't take hard left turns.
No.
And it disappeared, and it was out of sight. That was, pretty crazy. That wasn't my first experience with UFOs either, but that was my first experience with one in that area. And so the next day, I was out walking the shoreline of the Columbia River. My parents live right on the Columbia River. And it was tide. So you get these huge sandbars that come in, and you can walk way out in the hard-packed sand at low tide, because they're close to the ocean, where the Columbia River is very tidal in this area. And so I'm walking. I'm out on the hard-packed sand, and I'm a rock hound. I've always had the hobby of looking at rocks. And there's no rocks out here. It's all sand. So I saw a rock sitting there, and I go, well, that's weird. One little rock out in the middle of nowhere. And I pick it up, and this is the rock right here. This thing, it's been completely melted and liquefied on one side, and then it's black and scorched, and this thing has been through hell, and apparently came from the sky and probably landed in the river, because where I was standing is usually about neck deep of water. And I mean, I can't prove this, but I strongly suspect that this is a chunk of the debris fields that we were seeing in the sky that fell from the sky and landed in the Columbia River. And I mean, I'm very familiar with rocks. I pick them up constantly. I cut them, I polish them, I do with rocks. This is unlike anything I've ever found. You can get a magnet to stick to it, only certain parts of it, though. And whatever this thing went through, you're talking immense heat, because it's totally been liquefied smooth side, and it's just scorched and been through hell. And it has like a really weird, like white material in the middle of it. I mean, it's bizarre, whatever it is. And so I did take a picture of one of those crafts, one of those meteors and I sent pictures and I sent this rock to just about anybody and everybody I could in the UFO world, trying to get somebody to and nobody cared. So I sent it to a bunch of meteorite people, trying to pretend that I thought it was a meteorite, just trying to get testing done on it, trying to get something done on it. And nobody gave a damn. And nobody ever got back to me. And just it frustrated the hell out of me. And so that was kind of there was another UFO event that took place out in my parents' yard. And I'll back up a minute to kind of explain how and why I have always had an obsession with looking at the stars. It goes back to when I was a kid. Yeah, I saw that movie Fire in the Sky in the theater when I think I was in the 5th grade. And, that's the true story of Travis Walton and other things. I always was kind of fascinated with UFOs in that whole world. And I used to watch just constant stuff about UFOs. I pretty much burned myself out on the subject over the years. But I've always been staring at the sky my whole life. And then years ago, I was watching something Dr. Stephen Greer was saying about how people can summon UFOs through meditation and all this weird stuff, and I've never been big on meditation. I've tried it, never really gotten much out of it. But I did start going out almost every night that is clear with stars in the sky. And I would go out and stare at the sky, I guess you could say meditatively, basically just begging the sky to show me a UFO, and this went on for years. Then one night in my yard, or not in my yard, but out in the park near my house, I look up and I see this thing coming across the sky. Now, this ends up being the Elon Starlink satellite. This is the first time I ever saw it. But at that moment, I didn't know what it was. So I run inside and I tell my wife about it, and you can step right out my master bedroom and get on the roof. So I'm up on the roof and telling her about it, and she's just like, yeah, whatever. And then another stream comes by, 40, 50 little stars in a line. It was really crazy. But like I said, at the time, I didn't know what it was. And so I'm thinking these are some kind of UFOs at the time. So I was up all night, staring at the sky. And I'm in my yard. I'm also going out with the dog, walking around, staring. And it gets to be close to midnight. And I'm in my kitchen, actually, at this point, eating ice cream right out of the tub with the freezer door wide open. And I'm like, okay, I'm done staring at the sky. I've been doing this all night. I got to go to bed. And for some reason, I'm just like, okay, now I'm going to go out. I'm going to go look one more time. And I go out on the back deck of my house and I look up to the far west sky, the far, far west horizon. I see this blob in the sky. Now, about a year prior to this, we were in Colorado and we could see this meteorite not meteorite, it was a comet. Every night we could see this particular comet. And this comet was like a collection of teeny tiny little dots of light, like thousands of little dots making up this blob. And it didn't move through the sky. It was just fixed. But every night we looked at this comet. So when I to the far western sky, I thought I saw a comet. It was a blob of little teeny dots of light. And I'm staring at it for a while and thinking, well, that's crazy. I haven't heard anything about a comet being visible. And then I realized it is moving and it's getting closer and closer and closer. And then as I realized what it is, this thing, I shit you not, this thing was so huge. Because I live right near the Portland airport, sort of. And so we have commercial jets above our house constantly. So whatever this thing was had to be much higher than the jets that circle this area. They're always landing and taking off. And you can look out a window anytime and see a jet. And this thing stayed fixed in one spot for quite a while where I couldn't tell it was moving at all. And so I know it was very, very high up in the sky. And then by the time it got directly above me, if I would have put my hand up in the air and used like my pinky finger, that's about how much space it would have claimed in the night sky. Now, when you're looking at a commercial jet, cruising altitude, it's a speck. It's a tiny little speck in the sky. And this thing, I guarantee you, was probably several times higher than a jet at cruising altitude. And it was shaped like a rectangle, except it had a point on it. Kind of like shaped like a bad guy starship from Star Wars, really. And long and pointed on the end. And as I stare up at it, it's covered in teeny tiny little dots of light, like maybe hundreds of lights, except there was no pattern to them. There was no rhyme or reason to them. Just tiny little speckles all across this damn thing. Like a kid just threw it across it or something. It was just super bizarre. And I pull out my phone and I'm trying to get it in the screen and I can't figure out why I can't find it. And I realize I'm on selfie mode and I'm going through all this, finally get it in the screen and I'm screaming at my phone like, I got you, Effer, I got you. And I'm watching it go. And I'm just heart pounding. And I got some of the best UFO footage anybody's ever dreamed of having in their life. And it's going, and it's gone. And I'm just like so excited, and I'm walking, and then I realized in all of the moment, I never hit record. So I completely screwed myself out of like what could have been just some of the best UFO footage ever seen. And interestingly, so after seeing that craft, I had to start interneting and wanted to know what the hell this could possibly be. And that's when I found out that those strings of lights I had seen previously that night were his freaking satellites. But I could never find anything to explain this giant mothership of a ship. But what was really, really cool about it is somebody in Meridian, Idaho, about 20 minutes later. So it went from my house to Meridian, Idaho, in about 20 minutes, because the guy in Meridian, Idaho reported it to the UFO reporting hotline, described it exactly like I saw. He thought it was a comet. He called it a sparkling sword. And so I know I'd love to talk to that guy. I don't have any glad to get in contact with him. But that means that thing was traveling, rough 1,000 miles per hour, give or take, to get from basically Portland to Meridian in that period of time. I can't remember all the exacts, but it was around 1,000 miles per hour. And so that story is just kind of an example of, one of the key kind of moments that sort of fueled my obsession with Sasquatch was missing out on that footage, not getting it, being sure some people believe me, some people don't, but without proof, it's nothing. It's just a random story. And so that got me pretty obsessed with looking at the stars even more than I already was. And then that led me to the sighting in my parents' house that I just told you about, where I heard that rock. And then out underneath the same skies, in actually my parents' front yard, up one night, because they have amazing stars at their house. That whole area, there's not much light pollution. Yeah, so I was in my parents' yard looking at the night sky like I always do. And I see a group of lights, fluorescent greenish little specks of lights, and they're in a line with each other, but not traveling after each other. They were in a line, but the line was traveling that way across the sky. And it was just, something totally abnormal, something you don't see. And it was short-lived and it disappeared. I have a good friend of mine, Joe. He's been on some of my videos, and he's the one that originally turned me on to the wilderness area that is now my research area. And he's always had stories about UFOs and weird things that him and his rock hounding community have experienced in that area. It's around an area called the Columbia Bar, and that is where the Columbia River enters into the Pacific Ocean. And that whole area, in my opinion, has some kind of element to it comparable to what you would find at Skinwalker Ranch or, the Bermuda Triangle. There's a lot of weird stuff, weird histories there. And, prior to me going out and, having these weird experiences with Sasquatch, a friend of mine, he spent a lot of time in the mountains there, and he had all kinds of weird stories of UFO lights in the sky, weird things. And of course, as I got deeper and deeper into this Sasquatch mystery, I'm constantly finding anomalies out there that I attribute them to Sasquatch, but at the same time, we don't really know. Like recently on a mission, I found an area where something had came through the forest and knocked over about 25 trees, uprooted them and knocked them all over. And this was like a channel of trees, roughly 30 feet wide, roughly 100 feet long, trees on each side, totally blocking from wind or anything. There was no track marks, no anything on the ground. It was almost as if like a UFO came through there and just knocked over all these trees, or, a Bigfoot, a big, strong Bigfoot went through there. Because about half of them, about 70% of them were uprooted, tipped over on the ground. And then another remaining about 30% of them were broke clean off with the roots still attached to the ground. Now, the force to do either, to push over a tree and uproot it, you're talking insane strength. And then to do it where the roots don't even pop and this tree this big around just snaps clean off and all of the trees lean in one direction, just a swath of trees. It just constant weird stuff going on out there. And this whole area is very rural, and there's houses here and there, but it's a very rural area. And it really shouldn't be a rural area if you know the history of this area, because Astoria, Oregon is right there, right nearby. And Astoria, Oregon was first built in 1812. And it was the very first U.S. settlement on that side of the Rockies. Brought people there for the fur trade and stuff like that. And for whatever reason, it's just the area's never blown up. And in Astoria, especially in the surrounding areas, it should have blown up because, like, for example, when the War of 1812 started, Astoria was evacuated and everybody went back to the East Coast. And that trail on the way to the other side was sort of like the origins of the Oregon Trail. People followed those tracks and people came this way. And eventually, we won the war in Astoria because they left during the war and it became Fort George, but then we won the war and it became Astoria again. Then major industry came to that area for fishing, and all of this was the very first of its kind area. But it just seems like no matter what people tried to do there, hardships would follow and people would leave. And like the Columbia Bar, for example, it's right there. It is said to be the most treacherous river crossing port in the Pacific Ocean. 2,000 ships have crashed and sank right there in the bar. Its nickname is the Graveyard of the Pacific. And they blame it on, the tides and the changing sandbars and all that. And all that's true, but really all of that can be navigated by a good seaman, but it's the fog that just comes and goes from that area. And I've been out on missions, camping by myself in the woods where these fogs come in, and these fogs, you can't see, but maybe 15, 20 paces in front of you, your spotlight completely worthless, your night vision. If you try to use night vision in that fog, it just, and what I'm getting at is it's almost like the whole area just has like this protection over it, that it
Mm.
was never going to let anybody destroy it and develop it, because in all rights, that should be one of the most thriving, most populated places on our coast over here. And it's just not. I mean, at one point, like Astoria called itself the Venice of the Americas, and everything was looking like it was going to be a major city like Portland or Seattle. But then a fire came through and decimated Astoria, and and then that was all for the fur trade originally, until they killed off all the animals, and then major industry came there as they were taking all of the salmon for years and years and years. It was huge industry in there, people coming there because of all the fish. But it just seemed like no matter what happened, it just never could. It never, people left, and there's like a really weird example of a full tribe. Well, not a tribe, because it was all the Chinookan. That's what they called the natives of that area. And so there was all these different bands of natives that, had different islands and different areas. And I was reading a book years ago, and what it was a collection of journal entries from different explorers. And I can't even remember the name of this particular explorer, because if I remember right, he was Spanish and it was all translated into English. But he was talking about visiting these tribes on these islands out there in the Columbia. And the biggest, most powerful tribe or band or whatever you want to call them, it just vanished one day. And he said there was no explanation for it. And most of the Chinookans died from malaria and smallpox and things like that. But this was all before all of that happened. And in the history books don't have any writings about this or anything. They just attribute all of the disappearances to those diseases. But it was just real interesting reading his journal, how all of a sudden this thriving, huge tribe of natives was just gone and nobody had any explanation for it. And it's just the area itself, man. There's just this eerie kind of weirdness to it. And there's a guy in the Columbia River Gorge area, James Sabuski or something like that, and he owns Margie's Outdoor Store. And he has this paranormal reporting center that he runs out of his shop in the Gorge. Seems like a really cool guy. I probably just murdered his name, but he has a weird name like that. And he, he's convinced that the Columbia River Gorge has this type of energy to it, this crazy, bizarre thing. And everything that he's describing in that area is exactly what I'm finding in my area, which is, several hours away, same river, but, a different part. And so I have communicated with him and told him, said, it might be not so localized to just your area. I think this whole damn river has something going on with it. I mean, so many parts of it are so overpopulated now with people and industry, but these pockets that are still wild and still, there's a lot going on in them. And he'd be a really interesting person for you to interview as well, because he literally collects reports all day long of bizarre happenings. And I was in Idaho, northern Idaho last winter, looking for sign, just on a mission, looking for Sasquatch sign. And it took a few days, and I eventually started finding sign. And it was all gathered around this huge reservoir, and some of it very compelling sign, tree breaks and bends and topless trees and everything that I look for. And then it was interesting when I started looking at a map, that lake, that reservoir is part of a river that forms the Columbia, and I was just up in this really, really upper part in Idaho where the river actually flows north. It's one of the only north flowing rivers, flows north into Canada and then turns around and comes back down and creates Washington and Oregon. And it was just a bizarre coincidence, to be way out there and thinking I'm on totally different terrain. And then I realized, shit, I'm still following this damn river everywhere I go. And there's been other weird happenings in that area that are really, really bizarre. And to tell that story it'd be really hard because there's so much backstory and so much stuff that needs to be told with the content to explain it. But I am just beyond confident that there is some kind of, paranormal or supernatural type of energy or presence in that area. It's just.
Well, do you feel like then the UFO stuff that you're witnessing is a separate thing from the Bigfoot stuff, or do you really think that they are connected?
um I can only speculate, and I speculate that, yeah, in some way, in some weird form, they're all connected. They're all, maybe they're all part of some kind of other realm or energy or purpose. I don't know, but yes, I do feel like they are in connected. And I've often kind of wondered, if we are being visited by, travelers from another planet, let's say, they're not coming here and hanging out with the population of humans. They might be communicating with some of us, but I've always wondered if we have this creature like Sasquatch that has these abilities, and it's very possible that the UFOs communicate with them and just go right around us, and maybe they do come into those woods and have a powwow with them or whatever. And like I said, that's all just speculation, just different ponderings. I've often wondered. I don't know that UFOs are picking them up and they're cruising around. Who knows what's going on? But I do feel like they're all in some weird way connected. They're in some way, shape, or form, whatever that is. I do feel like there is, because for someone like me, like, there's so many people that have never had any kind of paranormal experience at all. My father's in his 70s, and the only paranormal experience he's ever had was when I went and dragged his ass out to the deck and said, "Look at the sky," And so it's bizarre to me, because I had my first paranormal experience when I was a little kid, very, very little kid. And I've had many over the years, and I have to assume that in some weird way, it's all interconnected. Because, I mean, what are the odds of someone having all of these weird experiences where most people don't even have one? And yet I've had an experience wherein I've seen UFOs. I've had an experience wherein, I've seen Sasquatch, and I've had experiences wherein I'm seeing things that I can only say, I don't like to use the word ghost because I don't know what the hell they are, but entities like that, and I don't believe I'm a psychic with magic abilities or anything like that. It's so I have to at least speculate that they are all in some weird way associated or interconnected or similar, or just because I've seen all three of them. It just.
Well, I'll tell you this. So my producer Phil, he likes to, when people come, when we talk to people and they have multiple experiences, he's a real skeptic who wants to believe. So when he hears that, he's like, "Oh, there's no way that somebody can experience all these things." He goes, he kind of dismisses it. He just like, I don't. But I have talked to so many people that have multiple things happen to them. And I am of the belief, and I may be totally wrong, but this is just what I believe. I believe that if you have one experience, say you see a ghost or whatever as a kid, that starts to peel back that veil that separates where we're at in your mind, okay? And you become more accepting of, okay, well, I know ghosts are real. I've seen one. I know I'm not crazy, or at least I don't think I'm crazy. Um, what else is out there? And just like you said, you're out looking for stuff. If you're not out looking at the sky, or if you're not out in the woods looking, well, you're not going to see stuff.
Yeah, very true.
You know what I'm saying? you're not going to see stuff. Like you had to drag your dad out because you were out looking and he was in watching, reruns of Quincy or something. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Oh,
And
exactly.
if you don't put yourself out there to do it, it's like, well, I can't understand why I didn't make the NFL. Well, I know why, because you weren't working out, you weren't lifting. It just doesn't happen. You have
Exactly.
to you have to put in the work. And if that work means going out and investigating stuff or just as mundane as looking up at the sky, you're never going to experience that stuff. And um,
Very true.
I think it's the same way like with people that are going out and experiencing ghosts um, because they're looking for them.
My very first experience, what I consider my very first experience, I didn't even realize till I was a grown up looking back on that and
Hmm.
realized, wow, that is pretty crazy. And I'll tell you that story. And like you said, like when you're somebody who sits here and talks about ghosts, UFOs, and Bigfoot, it makes you sound like a freaking nutcase or a liar. And that's why I originally told you that I didn't really want to get super in depth in the paranormal stuff because I feel like it just makes me seem unbelievable as a Bigfoot researcher. But I do have a lot of physical evidence to support my claims. And my very first experience was when I was probably 3 or 4 years old. I was young because it was in my parents' master bedroom, which they remodeled that house and master bedroom moved. And so I know I was in it pre renovation. And that happened when I was very young, the renovation. But I was in my mom's bed and I was sick and stayed home from school, had a fever, all that. And three people come in her bedroom and they're talking to me and they're sitting on the bed with me. And I can't remember, exactly what was talked about, but they introduced themselves to me. One of them told me I wasn't sick and they jumped on the bed. And I was a really shy kid. And I remember just being kind of real shy, but they seemed like normal people. They were younger than my parents, but, like young adult age. And then one of them was like, "Hey, we have to go. We have to go." And they left the room. And a little bit later, my mom comes in the room and I'm asking my mom, Mom, who are those people that were in here with me? Like were those friends of yours or whatever? I asked her. And I remember this because my mom said, "Oh, you must have just been hallucinating." And I was a little kid. And I ever since then, because I'd never heard that word before. And I'm like, hallucinating? What is hallucinating? And what's really weird about that experience is I ended up almost dying from that sickness. My parents had to rush me to the emergency room where my fever was like 104, 105. And like I was really close to dying. They had to do all this stuff to bring my fever down and all that. And I have this really vague memory of seeing those three people. And it's weird because I don't know if I'm creating it in my head, but I have this weird vision of seeing them at the hospital. And so I've often wondered if like I was supposed to die and those were gonna be like the beings that say, "Come with me, guide me into the light," or whatever the hell it was. And most of that whole experience was forgotten about until I got older and had more experiences with seemingly paranormal ghost type entities, and it really made me look back and wonder, just like at the beginning of the show we were talking about some Sasquatch incidences that happened pre to me being a believer. To me, I don't even like to call myself a believer, because a believer, when you believe in something, it's when you hope something is real or want something to be real. I'm so far beyond believing in Sasquatch. But you talked about Colin, with the marijuana Bigfoot or whatever you called that episode,
Hmm.
and so I did have an experience with him. Not with him, but he was involved with this grow in some way. That's a whole nother story in itself. But I was young, maybe 20s or 21, early 20s, 20 something years ago. And we're out in the woods. And when you take care of plants like this, it's a lot of work. We'd have to pack potting soil on our back and packing all these plants that are already about a foot tall out there and fencing them off. And so we'd be working all night, 3, 4 a.m. with just headlamps, digging holes and working like dogs out there, getting everything set up. And it was just me and another guy. We'll just call him Dude. And he had been out there with Colin when they had some weird experiences. But Dude didn't really talk about them. I just knew that he had been freaked out about something and he didn't know what to make of it. And ironically, this patch of forest is right near where Wes Germer had his experiences out there. Like, I mean, just maybe 7 miles or 8 miles roughly. I don't know exactly, but he's told me the proximity. So we're in that area and we're working on the plants, planting them, wiring them, whatever. And I kept hearing something circling us. And I'd hear a stick pop, a crack, a move, and it just kept doing circles around us all night. And so I told Dude, are you hearing this? And so he's listening and he starts hearing that something was definitely circling us. And we had this little routine that whenever one of us whistled, just any whistle, we went back to back. He had his gun out and I think I had a hatchet and like a knife and then our headlamps would go out. So we're protecting each other's backs. And, we've been paying attention to this thing circling us and I'm saying it's probably a cougar. And then we hadn't heard it for a while. And I hear this really low, like growl sound. And I say to Dude, hey, listen. And we're going dead silent. And then something growls. I mean, it sounded like it was 10 feet away from us. And so we immediately jump back to back. He's got his gun out and I got my headlamp and we're just standing there. And we stood there for probably 15, 20 minutes. Nothing happened at all. But, and so shortly after we got the hell out of there, we didn't even finish what we were doing. We came back, a week later and finished everything off. But at the time, I didn't think anything Bigfoot, and it might have been a thought in the back of my mind, but it's just like, no, it must have been a cougar or something. But I really wonder now, looking back, what that could have possibly been. And I just don't know that a cougar would circle us and have curiosity like that. A cougar would just get away from us and go away. And then
most animals would. There's like two things that I hear about that would do that and come check you out: a human being, or Sasquatch. You know what I'm saying? Like they seem to be the only things that would come to that wouldn't run away, that would come check you out.
Even a bear is going to hightail it. They smell a human, they're going to go, or they're just going to charge in and attack you. But black bears don't really do that very often. But I forgot one little part to that story was when we were packing all of the crap into the trees, we were getting barked at. And keep in mind, we're deep in the middle of freaking nowhere. And something is barking at us from the dark. And it wasn't like a burly, scary bark. It sounded like a yapper dog barking at us. And so we just assumed it must be a coyote, but I've never heard of coyotes barking at people. But it was really weird. And it was kind of following us from a distance and barking at us, just like an annoying dog would, but we could never see it, And so that I forgot about that. That was just sort of how it started.
A nod to Colin's story. One of the most, frightening things I've ever heard was the story he told about being out there in the middle of nowhere and hearing a baby cry.
Yeah, well, Mike, Dude was with him when that happened. Yeah.
Well, so he was the guy with the baby cry.
Yeah.
So for anybody that's listening has not heard the Bigfoot and marijuana episode, it's crazy. There's some crazy stories in there. And look, you're out there doing that stuff anyway. You guys are on high alert. I mean, And I guess I can't blame you because it's, you'd almost have to worry more about people than Bigfoot. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Oh yeah.
And so, so that's some crazy stuff, man. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing that part. But
And I wanted to share one thing. I got it here. I talked about this a lot with Wes and my hair, because I found a huge amount of Sasquatch hair out in my research.
holy crap.
Oh, this is actually only probably 60-70% of it. And I have a guy who's
Making
looking
a
at.
wig, making a wig out of that, because that is a lot of hair.
No, when I first saw it, I thought it was a wig. It was just this ball of this really weird hair. It's way thicker than any human hair. It's about 3 to 4 times the diameter of any human hair. And gosh, I'm horrible with names. But I have a bunch of samples of it out with a guy right now. He runs a channel called Red Dirt Cryptid Investigations, and his name's Brian Terrell, and he's looking at it, analyzing it for me. And he hasn't made anything conclusive on it yet, but he's personally excluded it being horse. Although I did have a different guy who told me he thinks it's horse. But I have some issues with that guy's evaluation, because he told me that it's horse hair from 4 different kinds of horses, which I have dreadlocks in here, full-blown locks that are all 4 different colors of hair in each lock. So you're not going to get 4 different species of hair from 4 different creatures form dreadlocks like this. It all had to originate from one source. So when he told me he thought it was horse from 4 different kinds of horses, I had to obviously pursue a second opinion. In this most recent analyzation from Brian Terrell, he told me right off the bat that he doesn't believe it's horse at all. And he hasn't concluded anything definitively yet, but he's told me that it's the best sample anybody's ever sent him. You know, it was hitting all the markers for things that he was looking for, but it had anomalies. You know, it's a really weird sample, because most people's Sasquatch hair is typically short, you know,
little. Yeah.
And I have some that are 21 inches long, which would mean that it had to have been ripped off of a head of a Sasquatch with long hair coming off its head. And
we have horses. That does not look like it doesn't look like any horses we have. Not saying that it doesn't look like it. I'm not saying it can't be horsehair, but that does not look like. I mean,
curly locks. Yeah, horses' hair tends to be more fluffy and not multicolored. I have black, brown, gray, and like transparent clear in here. Like I took some of this hair to a Bigfoot museum, and the guy that looked at it, you know, when you're dealing with Bigfoot stuff in the Pacific Northwest, if you're not in with like the right dudes, they treat you like you're just a nobody, you know, and I could tell immediately coming in to talk to him, he was already rolling his eyes in the back of his mind. He didn't give me any kind of chance. And he looked at the hair and told me it was synthetic. Right. And I'm like, man, it's not synthetic hair. I have a root attached to one right here. And then he changed his mind and goes, okay, yeah, it's not synthetic. And he did. He went through everything. Then he told me it had been dyed. And then I showed him one that went from black to brown, and that it had been sun bleached on one end. And then his partner came and looked at it and realized, okay, it hasn't been dyed. And he said it was horse. He said it was cow. He said it was elk. It's like he just, no matter what, he wasn't going to give me any kind of positive read. And anyway, yeah, it's been a nightmare getting this stuff analyzed and tested. But I do have a big old ball of it that I sent to Darby at NCSU. He's received it. I don't know how long that will take to get DNA on that, but Darby made it clear that it might be a year or two before we ever give you an answer, so I'm just trying to get as many eyeballs on it as possible because, I'm all about physical evidence, things that are tangible. That's what I love about like those pine cones. It's something you can hold in your hand. It's not just a video that somebody can say is, AI or staged or whatever. And I got the hair. I got that damn rock from that UFO too. If anybody can give any kind of advice on how to get that rock analyzed or tested, I would love help on that because I've been sitting on that rock now for 6, 7, 8 years. I don't even know. I've been sitting on that rock for a long time, way before Bigfoot came into my life.
Well, trust me, I know one thing. People that watch the show, they like to give lots of advice. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes sometimes it's not so good. Well, I want you to share with everybody. You've got a YouTube channel where they can go check out videos of some of the stuff you're doing, and then definitely go check out the episode. I don't know if the second one's been up, but I know you did 2 episodes with Wes. The first one is definitely been up. So go check out the Sasquatch Chronicles episode so you can hear a lot more about the Bigfoot. But yeah, give us the details about your YouTube channel so people can go check out what you're doing.
Yeah. My channel is NorthWest, but just NW Yeti Quest. NorthWest Yeti Quest. The actual full name of my channel is NorthWest Yeti Quest Columbia River Cryptids. But yeah, that gets too long for people. All you need to remember is NorthWest Yeti Quest, and you'll find it on YouTube. The channel's only been up for about 6 months, 7 months. But the first couple months, weren't much of anything. It was just my very first sighting of a Bigfoot. That was the first video I put up, and it's a real shitty video. The creature's way too far away. It's just a little dot in the screen. But I recently did a 3-minute video to sort of revamp that original footage, and that just is called my first sighting of my first experience with Sasquatch or something like that. And so, and I have probably 70 something videos. I mean, I've had a lot of discoveries in a short period of time. When you look at most researchers that have been at this stuff for decades, maybe I'm patting myself on the back or whatever, and I don't mean to sound like I'm egomaniacal, but in my first year of doing this, I've accumulated more evidence than most researchers have in decades. I mean, I have 2 different things of physical evidence, hair and pine cones. I've found countless footprints, countless structures. And these structures that I'm finding are mind-blowing. Like, they're not just those little stick structures that people make a big deal about. These are structures that would take, for a person to recreate them, would take winches and pulleys and massive, massive work. I've found a site of upside down trees, literal logs spun around and stabbed into the ground like lawn darts. And there's about 20 of those. I'm talking huge, 120 foot tall Doug firs, turned, still growing in the ground, and turned and bent completely sideways where they're like horizontal with the ground. And I mean, I'm finding amazing stuff. And I've found I've found 3 different elk skulls, interestingly, left in 3 different locations that had a lot of these weird, bizarre things. One of the elk kills was actually a full elk skeleton, and that's a long video. There's a lot I could go on and on and on about.
So in other words, go to NorthWest Yeti Quest, and you can see all the videos about all this stuff.
Yes,
and
you can.
and check it out. Check it out for yourself. So, well, Hugh, thanks for coming on and sharing some of this paranormal stuff, because I know you were hesitant, but I think it's important that if people are going to go listen to your Bigfoot stuff, they understand there's some other stuff behind it. So, but thanks for coming and sharing.
Yeah, man. Anytime.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast. Until next time, Never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.